day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for D.B. Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. This episode is a little different than what we've done before. I've had quite a few people tell me they'd like to hear me interviewed on the show. I'm always the one asking questions, but what do I think? Well, one person who requested this also said he wanted to be the one to do the interview. Kyle Kesterson is a musician, restaurateur, and fan of the Cooper Vortex. He'll be the one interviewing me, so I hope you enjoy this episode with my good friend Kyle Kesterson.
All right, so first question.
Let's do it.
How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Just went to my daughter's basketball game.
Okay, very cool. I've got a daughter too. She's 6. I was at gymnastics with her, so very, very cool. I think it's really rad that I don't know exactly how old you are, but I like when one of the things that interests me about you is that you're like one of the younger guys. Nikki's one of them too. Nikki Brown, I follow you guys like crazy. And I always like just knowing that there's other just young, cool dudes out there that are following this, you know?
I'm into that also. I'm 36. So
okay.
It is interesting that at 36, I'm one of the young people in a group at this point in my life.
Totally. And that's really cool.
But I definitely get what you're saying, that like, especially listening to someone, if you can relate, like all these guests are in their 50s or 60s, but the guy hosting the show, he's my same age.
Right. And I think that's just a really cool aspect of the show. You have some of the most interesting guests that I've ever had or ever heard on a podcast before. Like, it is insane, man. It goes from, just like crazy scientist people, it seems like, to people who think he was the Zodiac killer, to people who don't think he was the Zodiac killer, and all the other, in-betweens. And it's kind of it's a frustrating case, isn't it? Like, it just blows my mind a lot of the times.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating because it's unsolved.
Right. I heard a podcast of you guys earlier, and you were talking about how you wish the Tina Bar money had never been found. And I was like, I thought about that for 10 seconds, and I was like, that is such a brilliant point, Okay. All right. So now we're interviewing you. All right. So just out of curiosity, where are you from? Are you in the area where DB Cooper jumped from, or?
I grew up there. So I lived in Woodland, Washington, which is the town closest to the drop zone. Ariel, Amboy, Yakult, that area, those aren't really towns.
Okay.
Woodland, when I lived in Woodland, I think the population was like 40,000. I'm sure it's just completely exploded now, but.
Okay. So growing up there, was it like a topic of conversation? Like, when I see some of these YouTube videos and posts, there's like a bar where people go and meet up every year during DB Cooper time. There's Cooper Con, which I had no idea even existed until maybe 2 years ago. So is all of that just around you? Are you there at those things? I believe I saw that you were a host one year.
Yeah, I spoke at Cooper Con in 2019. I was the MC for Cooper Con this last year, 2021. I was at Cooper Con in 2018, and then the Ariel store where they used to have DB Cooper Days. I was at DB Cooper Days. It would have been, I think it was 2014 and 2013 that I was there for those. But in 2014, I moved to Idaho. But to answer your question, yes, it is a topic of discussion there. I've met many people growing up that claimed they knew who DB Cooper was. It's my Uncle Bill's friend out in Amboy is for sure him, but I won't tell you his name. Just like that kind of a thing.
That's so cool. That's so cool. All right. So if you don't mind me asking, then when was like the first time you heard about DB Cooper?
The first time, like most guests on the show, was Unsolved Mysteries. I remember watching it. It would have been a rerun because I think it aired in like 88. But I remember watching it with my sister, and then it was like Portland, Oregon. I'm like, whoa, that's right close to where we live. And it's like then Seattle, Washington, and he jumped out somewhere the woods and over here. And I'm like, that's right by our house. Like this guy jumped out really close to us, and it was exciting that I'm watching the show and it was local.
Right. That's gotta add something so much more to it, you know?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. So you just said that you went to these DB Cooper related things in like 2011, 2012. How old were you then? Like what were you doing? You're just a 25-year-old at the time, like going to these things. And
yeah, I was there at the DB Cooper days. I was there specifically to drink. Okay. That's what the event was. It was a huge party. It's this place. I want to say it's like 10 or 15 miles from the freeway. It's a long drive out there. It's basically in the middle of the woods, and there's nowhere to park, and no one ever really showed up to this place. I remember the last few years that Donna ran it, I would drive by, and if it was open, I would stop in because she sort of got to the point where she was like, if the light's on, we're open. If it's not, we're not open.
Okay.
But for DB Cooper days, it would be packed. I mean, it felt like the building was going to slide down the hill. People were parked like miles down the road because there's nowhere to park. So you would have to just walk through the woods in the pitch black at night to get to this crazy bar where there would be a bunch of people dressed up like DB Cooper. You had to tell people if they thought about going, look, it's cash only. So if you don't have cash, you're not getting anything there because they didn't have internet service to do a transaction or anything back then. It was such a cool place. Even, in 2010, 2011, whenever the first time I went there, it was like, it felt like a historical building, like just nothing had been changed in 50 years. It was just crazy.
I'm sorry to cut you off for a second. I get confused with a lot of the DB Cooper stories. Is this the bar that he supposedly went to and made the phone call from?
No, it wouldn't be. This is just a bar that sort of celebrated the fact that DB Cooper jumped in this area. The only thing they could make a name for themselves with was, hey, DB Cooper jumped around here. So the owner, Donis, just leaned heavily into that. And there was DB Cooper memorabilia on the walls. And if you came in there and you wanted to talk about it, like she was ready to talk about it with you. And then she passed away. And then the county, she was basically grandfathered in. Like, this building doesn't meet any sort of health and safety codes at all. You're serving food in here with basically a residential kitchen was what they were using to make food. Right. And so when she died, they said, you have to bring this up to current health and safety codes, especially if you're going to serve food and drinks and whatnot. And Brian really wanted that to happen, but unfortunately he was never able to do it. He was one of the first guests on the show, and passed away recently. So rest in peace, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. Rest in peace, Brian. Which Brian? I'm sorry.
Brian Woodruff.
Brian Woodruff. Okay. Sorry, you understood that confusion there. I thought we were talking about the other Brian. Okay. So my next question is, why do you do this, man? So you went there to go and drink, and now you host this podcast with, like I said earlier, just all these really, really unique people. So what made you say, hey, I'm going to start this DB Cooper podcast and go for it and do it for years?
Do it for years. That is a great question. So if I could go back in time and tell my 26-year-old self at DB Cooper days, dude, you're going to be doing a radio show about this for years. I would have laughed. Like, no, I'm not. I don't care about DB Cooper that much. Like, I don't even really know the story. I just know I saw Unsolved Mysteries, and that's basically how much information I have on this. And the reason I'm doing this show is a couple of things happened at the same time. My wife got me this book, Skyjack. I read Skyjack, and it sort of points towards Kenny Christensen and says, like, hey, these people stopped working with me, and they're going to write their own book. And I knew Skyjack was 2 or 3 years old when I read it. So I thought, okay, well, maybe that other book is out. I got on Amazon. It was Into the Blast by Skip Porteous, I think is his last name, and Robert Blevins. And I read that book, and I was like, okay, I know who DB Cooper was. It was Kenny Christensen. And I've solved the case. And I thought, okay, I'm going to check out this online forum that is mentioned in these books, which was the Drop Zone. So I got on the Drop Zone, and it was just a chaotic, wild scene. And basically it was like everything I learned about the case was wrong, but some of it was right. And then I was like, I don't know what to believe now. These people seem to know a lot more than me. And Bruce Smith was on there, and his book was fairly new. And some other people on there were like, oh yeah, Bruce, it's really good. I just picked it up. So I thought, okay, I'll get this book now too. And I got Bruce's book, and I was just blown away. I was like, there's so much more to this case than I thought. And there are all these crazy suspects, and all of the suspects are wild, and they all seem plausible. Like, how could this be? And so I started ordering more books. I think Bill Rawlins' book was one of the next ones I ordered. And I also, at this exact same time where I'm just feverishly reading all these DB Cooper books, I started this job where I work completely alone. So I listen to 40 to 60 hours a week of podcasts and talk radio. And, I had fallen into the vortex. So I got on Apple Podcasts and typed in DB Cooper. And there were probably like 40 episodes that were related to DB Cooper. And I thought, okay, I'm going to burn through all these. And I started listening to them. And by like the 7th one, I was already skipping past their explanation of the case, because I knew more than the hosts of these shows at that point in time. And then they would all do the exact same thing. 2 or 3 hosts would go over 3 to 5 suspects, and then they would agree on one of those suspects, and then the episode was done. And I was just like, none of this is what I'm looking for. I want to know what Bruce Smith thinks about this. Right. And I think around that same time, I had started listening to Joe Rogan as well. And he'll do an episode that's 3.5 hours. And as someone who's like desperate for more audio content, I was like, finally, there's somebody out here doing 4-hour radio shows other than Howard Stern. And it was all just one interview. And I remember in the beginning, like, this is going to get boring, but it never did. And I really, really liked that. And then another podcast I was listening to was Tim Ferriss does a phenomenal podcast. And his style is a lot more, I'm going to ask you the question, you're going to give the answer, than Joe Rogan, which seems to be like a super smooth conversation. It never feels like he's like really interviewing someone, Right. But I don't think I have that ability conversationally that Joe Rogan does. So, but I thought, okay, this is interesting. And then at the exact same time as that, this other podcast I listened to called Naked Mormonism by Bryce Blankenagel, which is a phenomenal show. He started that show, and he was like driving an interstate battery truck, I think. And eventually his show became so successful that he quit his job and exclusively was podcasting about Mormonism for a living. And I thought, okay, if this guy can create a show while he's doing a job and it's really good, and I really enjoy it. Maybe I could do the same thing with DB Cooper. And so I thought, well, the only way I could do that is if I could interview these people that I want to talk to. So I emailed the 5 people. It's not the people I most wanted to talk to. There's 2 things going on. I really wanted Robert Blevins. I really wanted Bruce Smith. And both of them live, relatively in the same area in Washington. And so I thought, I'll email 3 other people in Washington and see if they'll be on my show that doesn't exist. So I emailed 5 people, and those 5 people are my first 5 episodes. It was Bruce Smith, Robert Blevins, Brian Woodruff, Bradley Collins, and the Foremans. And I drove from Boise to Seattle and interviewed everyone in person there. And it was just amazing. It was the greatest experience. Like, I drove home and I was like, that went so well. It was amazing. And I felt like I did a good job. I was proud of the interviews, and I'm very critical of myself. So it's unusual that I would be happy with something that I did. And I was just like, this is going to be great. And I drove home and I sat on those interviews for probably 6 months. I had this idea in my head that I could just easily turn this into a show. I wanted kind of a cheesy Unsolved Mysteries vibe to it. But I didn't want to go over the hijacking over and over and over. If you've never heard about DB Cooper and you listen to episode 1 with me and Bruce Smith, boy, is it going way over your head, because we just get right into it immediately.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do it, and I was struggling to edit. It was taking me a lot longer. And Brian Woodruff posted on Facebook that this guy came around and made big promises about a new DB Cooper project, but it never happened. He's nothing but a phony and a liar. But he didn't mention me by name. And I saw that and I was like, he's right. And so I printed it out and I clipped it to the edge of my monitor. And I was like, I have to do something right now, because I asked these people for their time to be involved with my project, and I haven't done anything with that yet. And it was really weighing on me. And
that's crazy, man. That's insane.
I had worked with this guy, Russell Colbert, and I knew he went to school for audio video production, and we worked together at this company. I won't name the company because they were a shit show and a terrible company, horrible organization, horrible place to work. I have nothing good to say about them. But Russell and I briefly worked there together. I don't think there are many employees that worked there for a long time because it was terrible. But the day that I left there, I kind of screwed Russell over, because I knew that company, if you put in your notice, you're fired. They're not going to let you work the 2 weeks. And so I had a new gig lined up, but it had a start date. So I was like, well, I'm going to work, 11 more days or whatever it was at this company. And on my last day, I went in and I had planned on working the whole day. And I brought donuts in that morning because a few people knew that I was quitting. And Russell, I guess he was my supervisor. He was like the project coordinator. So sometimes he would be my boss. But on that morning, it was like I was supposed to go with Aaron and Dimitri and Russell, and was going to go with Jay. And when I showed up, it was like that had been switched. Russell was going to go with Aaron and Dimitri, and I would go with Jay. And when I found that out, I was like, I quit. And he was like, what? And I was like, no, right now I quit. I'm not going out with Jay. I'll go with Aaron and Dimitri, but I'm not going with Jay. And then he's like, fine. Then you just said you quit. And so I walked out the door, and he was pissed because he didn't want to go with Jay either.
He didn't want to go with Jay either.
So that was the last time I had spoken to Russell. Like, we weren't we traveled together and we were friendly. We were good coworkers, but we weren't friends. And so I don't know, it had probably been around the same time, maybe like 6 months since I had spoken to him at all. And I called him and I was like, hey, I have a crazy idea. I want to talk to you about, meet me at Mike's in Cuna and I'll buy you a beer. And he was like, okay. Luckily he met me. He sat down and I was like, all right, here's what I could do for you. I decided to create this podcast. I did all these interviews. I thought that I could put it together myself, but I can't do it and I need help. And I have nothing to offer you except you can put your name on it too. It will be our show. You can have half of nothing. And he was like, he just looked at me for a second and he was like, I'm in. And then I was like, really? He was like, yeah, I've thought about wanting to do a project like that, but he's like, I could never come up with something. And I was like, you can be involved too if you want to be on air or whatever. And he's like, no, I don't want to be on air. And even to this day, he's like, I talked to him a couple days ago and I was like, well, do you want to do an episode on the Vortex? Like, quite a bit about DB Cooper. You've listened to hundreds of hours of this. And he's still like, no, maybe for episode 200, I'll do it. And I'm like, I'm not doing 200 episodes of this. He's like, yeah, that's the point. But yeah, thank God for Russell, because otherwise the show probably never would have come out. Or the only thing that would have come out probably would have been those first 5 interviews raw. And they weren't very good. Also, to give Russell one more piece of credit for the show, one of the interviews I did in the very beginning, I sort of pushed this gossip angle with one of my guests, and we got into DB Cooper gossip for like 20 minutes. And it was juicy. It was all like about other people in the community, and it was very interesting. And when I gave those episodes to Russell, he gave them back to me. That one episode in particular, I was really excited to listen back. And when it got to that gossip part, it was completely gone. I mean, completely gone. He completely cut it out. And I called him and I was like, what the hell? Like, I thought that was the best part of this interview. And he said, you think it's the best part of the interview because you're involved in the gossip in that community. People who are listening to hear about DB Cooper don't care about the gossip of a few people online. And he had, the way he said that, even he had like a firm stance on it. And so I was like, okay, I see your point there. And I guess I agree. And looking back on it now, that was 100% the right decision. I think if I would have done that in a few episodes, I would have had several guests that wouldn't have come on. And I think it just would have made me look bad also.
Okay, so. Is Russell from that area as well, or is this after you moved to Idaho?
After I moved to Idaho, I'm pretty sure he's born and raised in Idaho.
Okay, all right, yeah, cool, awesome. That's such an interesting story, man. The way that all came together, the way that you kind of put the podcast up because you kind of had a gun to your head. This guy was like, he didn't name you, but I mean, that's truly awesome. Very, very cool.
Yeah, I did. When I saw that, I did send Brian a private message. I was like, I just want to let you know that I'm sorry. You're right. And I'm working on it. And, to his credit, he was like, well, thanks. I appreciate that. And we were able to be friends after that. So
really cool. Really
cool. It didn't make me mad.
So the first podcast you did, you actually drove to locations and talked to the people one-on-one and face-to-face?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In the beginning, I wanted to do all of my interviews in person. And prior to March 2020, most of my interviews were in person. I drove from Boise to Seattle and the Gorge to Portland. I drove from Boise to, I think it was Great Falls, Montana, to interview John Cameron. I drove from Boise to Salt Lake to interview Greg Gossett. Yeah, I like doing that. But since COVID happened, it's just a little bit easier to do it this way.
Right, to do it this way. Absolutely, man. I mean, who knew? That's awesome. I think everyone's really going to like to know that. So the next question is, in all the time that you've been doing the podcast, it sounds like you've listened to at least 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 people's versions of their stories. This is a question off the DB Cooper Vortex. Is there anyone are there any of the suspects in DB Cooper who you're willing to just take off the list? Like, there's no way it was this guy. There's no way it was that guy. Like, who are the people that there's just no way it was them?
There are anyone who is also the Zodiac off the list. There's just no way. Those people for sure, I can say a hard no. Ed Edwards, hard no on DB Cooper. Frank Morris.
There's no way the Zodiac killer. It wasn't his style of crimes. He took credit for almost everything. He instigated the media. They have descriptions of him,
There are two other suspects who I really don't like, and that would be Rackstraw and McCoy. They were so heavily investigated. I know there's a lot of like, there's the FBI is incompetent. Okay, but still you had, dozens of people heavily looking into those people, and nothing was found. Not even that no evidence was found. In many cases, McCoy and Rackstraw have been ruled out.
Right. And that's one of the things that I could never understand. And especially the McCoy thing, because, just look at his face, slap a pair of glasses on there and show it to the stewardess. Is this the guy that was sitting on that airplane with you?
They did that, and they played audio files of McCoy talking for the stewardesses.
And McCoy's the one who the FBI said when they shot him or whatever, we just killed DB Cooper.
Yes, but that's one specific agent, and it could be that guy looking for fame. Back in '74, whenever McCoy was shot, back then it was still cool for cops to kill someone. Now it's not cool.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right, absolutely. All right. I just wrote these down as side notes, but Marla Cooper, okay? Any validity there with LD Cooper? When I hear that story, I'm like, there's just no way that happened. There's no way he didn't change his last name. There's just that one I can't stand. And and I know they're one of your first interviews, but the Ron, Pat, and Tammy Foremans with Barbara. Just, can you speak on those two for a little bit? They're the two that like get stuck in my head, and take it away.
Well, LD Cooper is one of two or three suspects that the FBI says they ruled it out with their partial DNA profile. I think it was LD Cooper and Dwayne Weber are the two the FBI said they compared to the partial. I don't have a lot of faith in that because they have a partial that is collected from multiple sources. I don't know. I'm not sure what to think of the FBI DNA sample, so I really don't trust it or put a lot of faith in it. But LD was ruled out by the FBI using that. I don't think he really fits. I don't believe LD Cooper was DB Cooper. Now, Barb Dayton, if I could pick, if it was my choice who DB Cooper was, I would pick Barb Dayton because it is the most Portland story of all time at that point. It's just so perfect. It makes a crazy, insane story just on a whole nother level, crazier and more insane, if that's even possible. But was Barb DB Cooper? I don't think so, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, all right. Respectable. Fair enough.
And yes. One thing I'll say, when I interviewed the Foremans, I had completely discredited that up to that point, I thought it was my impression of the Foremans were I thought it was like some woke couple who was trying to like write a historical fiction book
Right.
that they could just sell in the area locally. And when I showed up and knocked on their door, they invited me into their home, and I realized like these are the kindest, nicest, most wonderful people. I absolutely have nothing bad to say about the Foremans. They were so kind to me. We did, it was a long interview with them, and we did the first part of it. And then Pat sort of was tired from talking. And so we decided to go to lunch. So I got in his car. He took me to lunch. I had lunch with Ron, Pat, and Tammy. And it was like I was having lunch with my aunt and my uncle that I hadn't seen in a while. It was just, it was great. I had a great time. Then we went back to their house after lunch. Oh, no, that's not true. He took me to I think it's how you pronounce it. He showed me his hangar, his airplane, all of his classic cars. And then we went back to his house and wrapped up that interview. And I remember walking out of the house back to my car thinking, okay, my what I thought of them was way different than who they really are. And I realized doing that they're not lying. Ron and Pat aren't lying to me at all. They are telling me a story that their friend that they truly loved told them. And that's something I've learned doing this show, is that most of these people aren't lying. A lot of them are doing this based off of something a loved one told them, which is why on my deathbed, I'm going to make a bunch of wild accusations and confessions so that I know what my kids will do the rest of their lives.
Okay, so this question is a question from me that I've thought about from time to time and haven't ever heard. How do you think he got to the airport, and how many different ways really are there that you can think of that he did get there? Were there buses that went to the airport? Were there taxis that could have maybe taxi drivers been interviewed? Was there a hotel across the street? Like, I'm not from the area. An accomplice. Do you think there was an accomplice? Can you speak to that? The way he got there?
Well, I think the real answer is I have no idea. Yeah, there are buses that go to the airport. You could take a taxi. You couldn't really take a train. I've heard people say he parked a boat by the airport and walked. I guess that's feasible, but I don't know how feasible that would be, because the airport's right next to the river, but it's not, I don't know. It's possible, but seems unlikely to me. Does he have an accomplice? I don't know.
Yeah.
The FBI did talk to a bunch of taxi cab drivers, but the problem is all of them said, yeah, I picked up a guy in a suit and took him to the airport.
That makes sense too. Right.
And back then, probably the vast majority of people were paying with cash in the taxi. So a lot of time you probably just got in and the guy doesn't really have much of a record. Maybe he has a ledger that he wrote names down on, but he could have given a fake name then too. So.
Right. All right. My next question is, I've always thought about the guy who checked DB Cooper in. It wouldn't be TSA at the time, right? What is that situation? The guy who says, I checked in DB Cooper, I sold him the ticket. He asked me if it was a 727. Does any information about that guy exist? His name? Did he speak more on the case? Was he ever interviewed?
Yeah, he was interviewed. I think his name was Dennis Lenz. I could be wrong about that. I could be mixing people up, but yeah, they did talk to him. I've heard that he asked if it was a 727. I'm not sure if that's fully confirmed or not, but I have heard that he asked if it was a 727. But at the time, it was just the gate agent. So he just walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. I'll take a one-way ticket to Seattle, pays cash for his ticket. The gate agent asks him, "What's your name?" And he says, "Dan Cooper." And the gate agent writes Dan Cooper on the ticket. DB Cooper didn't write his own name on that ticket. The gate agent did. But then from there, he just essentially walks up the back stairs or the aft stairs of the 727. I had Brendan Kerner, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, on the show. And he's not an expert on DB Cooper, but he was an expert on the golden age of air travel and the golden age of skyjacking. And he told me at that time, there were flights where you could literally pull up to the airport, walk in the back of the plane, and after the plane took off, the stewardess would walk down the aisle, and if you didn't have a ticket, you could give her the $27 or whatever the flight would be in the air. So yeah, security was a lot different.
Yeah. Okay. The next question I have, and I don't know if anyone's okay. Does anybody know what time he bought the ticket versus when they got onto the airplane? Was he in the airport for a while? Was it an hour? Was it 30 minutes? You know, like, is there anyone ever spoke on seeing him at the gate, but no one knew to pay attention to that?
He was there for a little while. I don't know the exact answer, the time difference between purchasing the ticket and boarding the plane. It's probably around 30 minutes. I could be wildly off by that. But there was, I believe, 2 people who saw him waiting at the airport. But again, you know, have you ever been to the airport? Did you walk past any guys in business suits?
Yes, sir. Yeah. If I had a time machine, man, I would go back to that day, right, and just buy a ticket for that flight. You know, problem solved, and see what plan B was.
Oh, 100%. I would. I'd do the exact same thing. So I'd get on the plane, and I'd sit close to him, and I would just look over and wink at him and be like, "You're going to get away with this.
You're going to get away with this." That's awesome.
And then I'd travel back to 2022, and I could tell you all, oh my God, it was Barb Dayton.
It was Barb Dayton. Portlandia, baby. All right. I think I kind of already spoke on this. My next question was, did the FBI look for any abandoned cars or abandoned boats in the area?
They did.
And just found nothing? There wasn't anything there?
No, I think there's I could be mixing a couple stories up here, but I know that there was a car like at a lake or by a dock, and it had like a U.S. parachuting sticker on it, and they camped out by it for a few days, and the person came back and was like, "Oh yeah, it wasn't me." But there was also another copycat skyjacker.
It was Barb Davis.
Was it?
No. That'd be funny though. It was a girl. You know?
There was another copycat who, when he was caught, he had a U.S. parachuting sticker on his car as well, which was pretty funny.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the things that I've been confused about is like, okay, the airplane. The passengers entered from the staircase in the back of the plane. That's how everybody got on?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So they walk onto the plane, and everyone is walking up to the front of the plane for some reason. You'd think you'd want to be in the back of the plane because you're going to get off first. So everyone walks onto the plane. He gets on last. He's right there. The question that I have is if the money transfer. I've heard tons of people say they had to walk past all of the guests or all of the passengers with the bag of money. But if he's at the back of the plane and that's where the money's coming from, how did anyone, there was no one to be walked past to with a bag of money?
I believe they used the aft stairs when they brought the parachutes and the money up. That is a point that was debated by like Robert 99 and Flyjack on the Drop Zone recently with different FBI documents coming out. But there are a couple of things in this case that I'm even hesitant to discuss because there have been so many completely different narratives. The parachutes specifically, I believe I know what they are now because of some of the work Flyjack's done. But even then, I'm not super sure because I've read so many completely different accounts. And the FBI files, it's not like they come out and it's a beautiful, clean timeline of the events that transpired. The FBI files we have really are just a collection of notes from agents in discussions with people. So you could have one FBI file that said, oh yeah, they actually, they ended up cutting a hole in the side of the plane and sneaking the parachutes and the money in that. And that FBI agent has to write that report down and put it in the files. So even though we have these FBI files, there's a lot in there that obviously is not true. So there are still details about the specifics of the skyjacking that I'm not super sure of, but it could be because I've looked into so many of these wild theories that it's clouded my ability to determine what actually happened and what didn't.
Right. So if they use the back staircase, or if they use the aft stairs, which is, am I correct? Is that from the side of the plane and the front of the plane? Then that's where they.
Yeah, on the side of the plane they would. I'm not sure. The door on the side does
like
not
how you get
down and go to
get on an airplane now.
I see. Now you're asking me like specific airplane questions. How dare you?
Okay, I've always wondered this. Did DB Cooper have the stewardess put the windows down, or did he have the passengers put the windows down? Have you ever heard of that?
I believe he had the stewardess do that after the passengers had left the plane.
After they had left the plane.
Right.
Okay. The next question is, DB Cooper, he had 2 drinks and he paid with his drinks with cash on the airplane. So aren't those more pieces of evidence? Were those ever collected? There's got to be 2 glasses with fingerprints on it. He paid for it with a $20 bill. I mean, there were only 35 people on board. How many different 20s did they get on board? Or would she not have remembered, this is the $20 that the guy who's hijacking the plane gave me? Have you ever heard of anything like that?
That's a good question. I haven't heard of that specifically. I think it was Bill Rollins brought up something along those lines. And I believe it was like, you can't get a good fingerprint off of money because it's porous. It's cotton and paper. So it's just not a surface that you could easily lift a print from, was I think what I heard from Bill Rollins. But I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, it's out there now. Okay, the next question is, well, everyone always talks about the conditions outside, the weather. That's one of the big things that I always heard about when you just hear the broad strokes of the story. But when I think about that, don't you think he knew what the weather conditions were? I know the way he was dressed. I know that they talk about his shoes, but if he had all of this other stuff figured out, don't you think he watched the news that morning and heard what the weather was going to be like at 8 o'clock at night, or talked to anybody at the airport? It's just, sometimes I get so hung up on the weather scenario when people talk about it was cold, it was windy. I believe I've heard you speak on it before, saying that it's not maybe as bad as it was.
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as it was at all. I think he wanted to jump at night, because if he didn't want to jump at night, then hijacking a plane leaving Portland at 2:50 in November, it's going to be approaching dark by the time they land in Seattle. That area, that time of year, it gets dark very early. You think about going to work in the dark, coming home in the dark. Very short window of sunlight. So he wanted to jump at night. Otherwise, he planned this terribly, which I don't think he did. And in the Pacific Northwest, it rains. It rains a lot. It rains most of the year. And so if you live in the Midwest, or if you live in Florida and you hear that it's raining, your mind goes to a storm. because that's the experience you have with rain. Um,
Right.
there, it's just a light drizzle that comes down all day long and nothing crazy. The temperature, sure, at 10,000 feet in the wind, it would be a little cold. He's not going to be in the air for an hour. And the temperature on the ground, I believe, was around 40 degrees. It's wet, it's miserable, but it's not that cold. And the area is not that remote. There's a lot of farmland that was in the area that he jumped in. There's a lot of really heavily wooded area that he jumped in, but there are also rivers and streams and railroad tracks and roads and houses and stores. So it's not as remote as some people make it out. If he lands on the ground and he's able to walk to get out, then he 100% lives. I'm not a survivalist. I'm not a badass. I'm I'm a short, weak man. But if you dropped me into that area on a cold November night, I can absolutely get out of there, and it would be no problem. I'll do it in jeans and flannel shirt. It's the idea that he would have perished in the woods because he didn't have supplies, or he had to burn the money to stay alive because he needed the heat. That's all total bullshit. Anywhere in that area you walk a certain direction for a while, and you're going to find some sort of civilization or a path that clearly takes you there.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go in a little bit of a different direction here, and these next couple questions. This next question's about the plane speed, and I'm just going to bring this up based on something that I've encountered before. I take my family down to Fort Myers Beach in Florida once or twice a year, and have been for the last 6 years or so. When I get on the airplane and we take the flights, they say from Chicago to Fort Myers Beach, it's going to be a 3-hour and 10-minute flight. Now, almost always this has happened. The pilot will get on maybe 30 minutes in and say, hey, the wind is going with us right now. We're going to be there in 2 hours and 25 minutes. I've seen almost an hour of a flight taken off of a normal standard flight time because the winds are going in that direction. Is there anything to that could have happened in this DB Cooper thing where it couldn't have been tested the exact same way, in my opinion? No matter what, you took the same flight out, the same pilot, the same route, but if the winds, is there anything to that?
Well, I would point you to Dr. Edwards' book, Flight 305. He does an exceptional job. He has all this wind data at specific heights and locations and breaks down basically the exact jump conditions that Cooper would have faced. What he also does in that book is he totally shits on the sled test. And I was a fan of the sled test. I thought, okay, they took the exact same plane, they flew it out over the ocean at 10,000 feet and 15-degree flaps with the landing gear down, and they pushed the sled out the back. Well, it turns out that they didn't really duplicate as many of the elements of Cooper's jump as I had thought. Turns out they were flying at like 7,000 feet for some reason. They had the door to the cockpit open, and they just didn't really try to get it as close as I had thought. So I was totally sold on that pressure bump, but after reading Dr. Edwards' book, now I think the pressure bump is likely where he jumped, but now I'm not certain.
Got it. Absolutely. Okay, my next question is, as somebody that listens to your podcast all of the time, Bruce Smith, Eric Ullis, you have these two guys. I listened to both of them. They both have completely different opinions about things. One of them believes real strongly into a different flight pattern, right? That's Eric. And then Bruce seems to be, correct me if I'm wrong, he seems to be a guy who's more could you tell me the main differences between these two guys?
I would say the biggest difference is Eric doesn't really like the woo-woo stuff, and Bruce loves it. That would be, in my opinion, the biggest difference. And the Western flight path, I spoke with Bruce recently, and he seems to be leaning more towards the Western flight path these days.
Very interesting.
Yes, it is.
And then that. So I always look really strong to Bruce and Eric, and really follow those podcasts. But then you've got Nikki, who I believe you're friends with. Can you speak to that? I talked to Nikki and friended him on the DB Cooper Facebook page, and he seems to know you very well.
Yeah, Nikki is someone I've met doing the show who is a very, very close friend. I absolutely love Nikki. He's great. And even just like meeting Nikki is crazy because you had another personality that Nikki sort of was involved in. And then there was confusion over, were they the same person? Because for some reason in the DB Cooper world, there are a lot of people pretending to be somebody else online. I don't know why that happens, but it's all over the place. And so I was hesitant in the beginning to even engage with Nikki because of this, but it turned out like he sort of got somebody else's reputation wrapped up with his, and now he's great. His suspect, James Klansnick, is another one of these suspects where you want to say like, it's not that guy, but then you look at everything that has been put forward and you're like, okay, that's pretty interesting. Like that's really interesting. And Klansnick is one of a few people who, you can make a case for the particles on the tie with Klansnick. The only real thing that you can say, oh, it wasn't Klansnick, is Klansnick has no motive. He has a great job. He has a great family. Seemed to be a pretty happy guy. Lived what seems like a great life. But you can't say that he doesn't have a motive because you don't know what he thought. You don't know what was going on with him at the time. Famously, the FBI closed that Las Vegas country music concert shooter case, and they obviously knew who it was. But when they closed the case, they said, we have no idea what his motive was. And, at this point, it's tough to get it out of him.
Right. Okay. Next question. I listen to these Bruce A. Smith podcasts sometimes. Has he named a suspect? Who does Bruce A. Smith think that DB Cooper is?
It's interesting. He really likes the Mac v. SOG crew for it. And one of these specialized commandos, I believe he would lean towards one of those guys. And all of those guys say it's Ted Braden. But Bruce isn't a big fan of Ted Braden. Instantly, he'll tell you, oh, Braden, it's not Braden. He's too short. Or Braden didn't have the demeanor, the personality that Cooper would have. Braden would have been a little more chaotic. Although Drew Beeson and myself would disagree with that. But Bruce hasn't named a suspect. And I really enjoy the guests who are really knowledgeable on the case, but don't have a specific suspect, because it lets me sort of move around a little more. I've had guests on that have, sort of ridiculous suspects. And it's like, I have to take the show down this path. Even for some suspects, I won't bring up something that I know like goes right against it. Cause my show isn't like, oh, gotcha, in your face, you look bad now. It's the whole point is you get this opportunity to present your case of DB Cooper. And I'm just going to be the one that holds the microphone for you.
And I think that's one of the coolest elements of your podcast. The fact that you don't sit there and go, Marla Cooper, that's not right. I really enjoy that. You give people the platform. And as an outsider looking in, I've kind of thought, why isn't he doing that? But now hearing what you're saying, this is what they've been told by loved ones. This is what they hear in their family. That makes sense now. You know, maybe they're not as crazy as I think they are. If, you know, your dad said something to you, or, you know, your husband said something to you on his deathbed. So
yeah, I don't have a suspect. I don't know who DB Cooper was. And it's not up to me to tell you what to think about this, because I myself don't know. So it's up to you to decide who you like, who you think is telling the truth, and the angles on the research in the case that you like. It's up to the listener. If you want to scream that someone is wrong at the radio, that's what it's for. You get to decide who's right and who's wrong.
Very cool. All right. My next question is, I don't know why this fascinates me so much, but the anonymous guest that you have on your show, is he anonymous to you or just the podcast? Like, do you know his name and know who he is? Or does he call you up as the anonymous guest and you have no idea who he is?
I know who he is. He's not anonymous anymore. He spoke at CooperCon. His name's Dave. If you want to look him up and you have to know his last name, I'm sure you could find it. Love the guy. He's great.
Very cool. Was there a reason why he was anonymous for that time, or?
Yeah. And it's one that I really respected. You know, he has a legitimate day job that could potentially be damaged by him being associated with wackos. So he, as a passionate person about this case, even still realized, like, this is a fringe community with a lot of oddballs in it, and maybe, like, this isn't the thing that I should put my name on. But, you know, it's the vortex. Once you get sucked in, you can't get out. I think the first time I talked to him, he was like, yeah, I know I'll do this for a little bit, but it's getting old. That was years ago. and he's still doing it. Absolutely great guy. Very, very smart guy. And I also like the idea that he's anonymous on the show. He's made himself more public now, but I'm not going to go back and update those episodes and put his name
and edit those episodes. No, you can't.
Yeah, I love that it's anonymous. Yeah, I've had one or two other guests that were like a first name or a fake last name. So I get it.
All right. On the DB Cooper Vortex Facebook site, Chris Cunningham, this is the only question that's like this, would like to know how far you think you could kick a football.
It's a good question. I would say I could kick a football. I could kick a football 30 yards. How long can I make a field goal? I could kick a field goal from 11 yards, but that's not in a play. If I actually have to play football, then there's no way I could ever kick a field goal.
All right. Now, a serious question was, in light of Darren's interview with Alfred Friedberg, do you think the money was spent?
I don't. Until that interview, I truly believed that they just weren't looking for the money, and it would have been too difficult. This is like pre-computers, but this guy knows. I mean, if anyone listened to that and disagreed with him, I'd ask you this: do you think you know more about U.S. currency than him?
Right.
And he's one of those guys where it's
no
like,
way.
How many people in the world know more about U.S. currency than him? He knows the most. Really, he does. And he just so confidently was like, okay, you're going to have over 9,000 $20 bills go into circulation, and there are at least some people looking for those. And you have to remember also at the time, a $20 bill would be equivalent to 100 today. So
right.
It's a lot more money than you think. And people were looking for them. And there were some specific things specific things on those bills that they wanted people to look out for. 1969 Series A, star notes, things that are very obvious for a teller if they're just flipping through 120s or something like that. Oh, that's a 69 Series A with a star on it. I'm going to put that aside and check it. So the idea that you have 9,000 of these bills enter circulation, and I believe he said the average lifespan for a 20 around that time was 8 years. So you have from 71 to at least 1979 that you're going to have a lot of these bills floating around in circulation. And the odds that none of them were ever in a flagged transaction, or someone just happened to look at the right bill at the right time. He's just like, that doesn't make sense to me at all. And then also the idea that there are lots of places in the world where you can spend US currency. So the idea that he then goes to Turks and Caicos or something, or he goes to Honduras and is spending money there, you have to think about that also. So here comes this rich dude that's throwing all this money around, and it's these 20s that we're looking for in the States. And his biggest point with that was, well, forget about it being found there because it might not be, but that money has to come back to the United States. Otherwise, it's not really worth it for that country.
Worthless, yeah.
Yeah. So it's just paper somebody else brought and used to buy stuff. So he was just like, there's just no way that any of that money was ever spent. And he was very confident about that.
I've always kind of thought, and maybe it's, it's just maybe such a rookie thought that maybe he had that money and you had the money and it's legit money. Maybe it could have been someone that knew how to alter bills, get rid of the star, change some of the serial numbers around, and get rid of it and different things. But the one theory that you brought up in one of the episodes that I loved is when you guys said that he put the Tina Bar situation, that he put the money out there to see if someone would use it, spend it, and if anyone would get caught with it.
That's an interesting theory. The problem I have with that is, if you bury something and you want someone to find it, I don't think Tina Bar was a good place to do that. I would have gone to Lewis and Clark Park or something and made it somewhere obvious, put it in a kid's sandbox at a playground that's right under the drop zone.
Right.
Somewhere where it's going to be found. You can't bury something on a remote beach. This isn't a beach that was public. It was a beach that a handful of locals would have known about was a good private fishing spot or hangout. It wasn't a park. So to put it there, expecting it to be found, in my opinion, is foolish. If I want something to be found, I'm not burying it on Tina Bar.
Correct.
Although what I just said is foolish because it was found on Tina Bar. So I don't believe it was put there to be found. Tom Colbert has this theory that, it was planted there by, what's that guy's name? Pudgy. Pudgy planted it there or something and told the Ingrams to go find it the next day. I don't believe that story. The Tina Bar money, like you said, we've said on the show, I almost wish that it never happened because it doesn't answer any questions in this case at all. It doesn't answer a single question. The only thing it does is add a series of questions. And now we have to debate the flight path because of where the money was found. Like that kind of stuff. It's like,
right. Did you meet the kid that found the money?
I haven't met Brian yet. I did meet Bill Mitchell at the last CooperCon, which was pretty cool.
Would Brian ever do your show? You've obviously had to have reached out to that guy before.
I believe he would. I've thought about this. I asked Bill Mitchell if he would do the show and he said yes. And I haven't reached back out to him since. With Bill and Brian, I know that the people listening to the show, my audience, they would love to hear those people on the show. But I haven't had any firsthand account people on the show. I've only had people who, theorize about the case or had a book on it. So
I'm not sure. I know Nikki's been bugging me to get them on the show, and I'll probably.
Is that a choice? That's a choice you've made, to just have people that theorize about it and not have it was first-handed, had something to do with it?
It's become a choice. One of the things early on, I was like, okay, I'm not going after Tina Mucklow. Like, I'm never going to contact her because I don't want to be one of the evil men who harass her that, she writes about in the Rolling Stone article. So I just, right away, I was like, I'm never going to contact her. And so I never went after any of the people on the plane, any of the pilots, anything like that. So I just sort of assumed they were tired of talking about it. But, it's been 50 years. I probably will get bullied by Nikki enough that I'll do it.
He is the man. He's very cool. I talked to him a lot before doing this podcast. I told you how I was kind of nervous about this, and you can still probably tell I am, but Nick was like, dude, chill, have a beer. It'll be fine. And he said, come to CooperCon, we'll party.
Hell yeah.
All right. So the next question is off of the Facebook site. Dave Foodman would like to hear about what your vision is for the future of your show.
Wow.
I think he was, and then I believe he asked after that, are you running out of guests?
Okay, this is a great question, and this will be a controversial answer. So I have tried to quit the show twice before, and I can't. It's like, oh, there's this guest or that guest, or this development happened, or this book is coming out, or CooperCon. I am wrapping up this show. I am definitely not going to be doing DB Cooper. And running out of guests, the answer is yes. I don't want this show to be watered down with people who shouldn't be on the show, that I chased and got on the show for no reason. I don't want people to be on the show who don't deserve to be. I'm very proud of this show. I'm very proud of the work that Russell and I have done. And I've spoken to almost everyone I want to. All the people who want to do the show have done the show. All the people who are willing to do the show, I've already forced them to do the show. And the only people that are left are people who don't want to do the show, or people who are holding out for whatever reason. So the show is wrapping up, and it's going to be wrapping up in the next few weeks or months. But what I am going to do is I'm leaving the show up, but if there is a guest that I would die to have on the show, I'm going to do another episode. If a new book comes out that I think is phenomenal, I'm going to do another episode. But I'm not going to be like actively pursuing people to be on the show anymore, because I basically have talked to most people. I have a guest scheduled for September that will be very exciting. I have a guest scheduled in a few weeks that will be very exciting. I have an episode that I recorded a couple days ago that should be out, or will already be out by the time you will have listened to this. So there's a lot going on right now, but the Cooper Vortex, it's not coming to an end, but it's going to be on pause for a while. Maybe I'll do like a yearly anniversary update, and then one or two guests a year, maybe if it warrants it.
You're going to retire like Ric Flair.
Yeah, absolutely. Russell and I love doing interviews. I love being interviewed. I have a really good time doing this show, and I've learned a lot. I have learned an incredible amount, not just about DB Cooper, but about podcasting, about conversation, about cold calling someone. I've learned a lot doing the show, and so Russell and I have another show that'll be coming out real soon. It might already be out by the time you're listening to this, but I want to do another interview show where I'm not pigeonholed into a specific niche unsolved crime from 50 years ago. So Russell and I are going to do a show called The Book of Darren, where it will be, me interviewing people that I wanted to talk to with no specific subject that I'm forced into.
That's awesome. That's very, very cool. All right. Liz Rogers on Facebook would like to know, and she asked me 2 questions, but they're both kind of similar. The first one that she asked was, if you had to place a bet between William Gossett or Klansnick to be DB Cooper, who would you pick?
I'd pick Gossett.
Gossett. And then the second to last question that I have for you here, and I got this from 11 different people on the site. Apparently, lots of people want me to put a gun to your head, but they said if you put a gun to Darren's head and he had to name one suspect of who he thought was DB Cooper, who would he say?
I'd say Ted Braden.
Awesome. Awesome.
And then hope that answer was correct.
Hope that answer was correct. Who you think it is, who you want it to be is Barbara Dalton.
Barb Dayton. That's, if I get to pick, it's not like I want Cooper to be Barb Dayton, but if I got to pick, that's who I would pick, because it would just make this story so insane. But, Barb Dayton probably isn't in the running for the most likely suspect. I'm really impressed with Drew Beeson's book, The Paratrooper of Fortune. I like Drew's attitude. He'll tell you he doesn't know when he doesn't know. He'll tell you the evidence against Ted Braden. And I've talked to a lot of people who don't want to do the difficult questions. But Drew is like, yeah, right away, ask me the most difficult question. Ask me what the worst evidence is against Ted Braden, and then I'll tell you why he's good. And so I have a lot of respect for that. And Paratrooper Fortune's a great book. Go pick it up.
Where do I get that?
Probably Amazon.
Amazon. All right. I want to buy one of Bruce H. Smith's book, but his podcasts are all 4 hours long. I'm like, what does he say in this book that he isn't yelling at you via the podcast that he's on?
I would still pick up his book. There are times where I'll be reading somebody else's Cooper book and I'll read something in there and I'm like, I'm not sure about that. So I'll reference check it against Bruce's book. That's sort of the opinion I have on DB Cooper and the FBI. And his third version that's out is fantastic. I highly recommend everyone support Bruce Smith.
So do I.
It's an amazing book. He's an amazing guy. He deserves all of the accolades and support and attention that he gets, and a lot more. He is amazing. I love Bruce.
He's absolutely brilliant. Yes. All right. The last question that I have for you tonight, it's not even really a question. I'm just going to say the name, Larry Carr. Everyone on the forum wants to know if you're going to get him. Have you reached out to him? Is that coming? Is that you said something, you have a big guest coming in September. Are you alluding to that, or can't you say it?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Larry Carr, man, are we ever going to get this guy?
Stay tuned.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I've
Not a
been working on that,
but not a no.
I sent a request to the Seattle FBI office to have Larry Carr on the show. And they said no. But in the message I got back, there was like a little asterisk at the bottom that said if I was unhappy with my response, that I could appeal it to national. So I thought, okay, this can't go wrong. So I then, got that email, sent it off to national. And then I was assigned someone to deal with. This guy who was really, it seemed like his job was to guide me through the process of getting this approved. And he was very helpful, very kind, got back to me the second time. He was like, okay, we'll get this submitted. We need to know what the show's about. We need to know a link to the show where we can find it, who the audience is. Like, vaguely, like my audience is the people who tune into this podcast. It wasn't like I had to name names, but it's, and then they wanted to have a list of questions in advance, and it didn't have to be like exactly what was going to be said, but it had to be enough that it represented the direction of the interview. And, it took me a few minutes to put all this stuff together for him, and I sent it back. And then 4 weeks later, something like that, this guy calls me back and he is like, yeah, they're not going to do it. It's a shame, but yeah, they're not into doing it. And I was like, okay, thanks. And he's like, but I think you should send in another request and see if it'll happen. And I was like, okay, when? And he's like, right now. And I'm like, okay. And so I started that whole process over again. Only this time I didn't have like a guide or a coach. It was just over email. And I got a response back 5 or 6 weeks later after that. And the official response I got was, my request has been denied and no further explanation will be given. And that was like all that was in the email. And so, okay, I guess that's not happening right now.
And that's probably the most intense thing you've had to go through to get a guest on, or?
The most intense thing I've had to go through to get a guest on. That's a good question. I've got a guest who will hopefully be on in the next few weeks. That's been rescheduled quite a few times, but that's another one where I've been working on this specific guest since the show started. And he says,
you just have some prizes for some people.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, he says the interview is going to happen and he wants to do it, but they're a busy person, so beggars can't be choosers. Hopefully he'll be on the show soon, and it'll be awesome.
All right. So let me ask you this question. I know this one sounds weird, but do you know any of the notable people in the world that listen to your podcast? Because the other day I was on Instagram. It was really cool. This was probably about 3 weeks ago. And the pro wrestler MVP, who's all over TV and all over the WWE network, he posted a Instagram photo online. And it was of DB Cooper. And he asked the world, hey, do you think DB Cooper lived? Do you think he got away with it? And then in his comment section, he goes, I listened to this podcast called the Cooper Vortex. And then he referenced something after that. So I just want to let you know, hey, you're doing an awesome job. There's pro wrestlers and rad people out there listening to the podcast. And does that information get back to you anyway?
Well, the MVP one did, because I believe he's a friend of mine in the Vortex. So he told me about that he's like, oh yeah, I was close with some people in the wrestling community. I know this guy and he listens to the show. And I haven't been up on my wrestlers since I was probably 15. So I had to look into it, but I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm just stoked that anyone listens to the show. When I put this together originally, I thought, okay, I'll do probably 20 episodes. And if those 20 episodes get 1,000 downloads overall, like for all 20 episodes total, I would consider this a success. And because I thought, who's going to listen to this? The only people I knew that would listen to it were the people that were arguing about it all day long on the forums. Outside of that, I wasn't sure. I thought, okay, maybe I'll pick up a couple true crime fans, but no one wants to hear about the same case over and over and over and over for hours and hours and hours. Well, it turns out a lot more people do than I had guessed. So to everyone listening to this, thank you. This show has been a great time and something I'm really proud of and enjoy doing.
And even if you retire the show, you'll never, you cemented your legacy in this DB Cooper thing. They're going to be making you be the host of this CooperCon thing for years. And when these guys, Eric and Brian and all these other people aren't here anymore, you're going to be there carrying that flag. So
maybe we'll see. But it's they call it the vortex because you can't escape. Kyle, multiple times a day, I'm checking obscure internet forums to see if anyone made a new comment about a 50-year-old unsolved case. That sounds like something a mentally ill person would do. But I can't stop. I can't tell you how many times one of the first things I've done when I open my eyes in the morning is check the drop zone.
Right.
That's insane behavior. But I really only know one person that has fully escaped the vortex alive, and that was Sluggo, we'll call him. And he had this great website, N467 US. And it was a great resource of information on DB Cooper because he sort of put together, these are the facts that we know. This is sort of the timeline without any theory or conjecture or anything like that. And one day he was just like, I'm done with this. I'm out of here. Don't call me about this. Don't email me about this. I'm done with DB Cooper. And he was true to his word, because I've seen over the years many people who have said, I quit, I'm done. But then you click on their profile and the last time they visited the drop zone was 2 hours ago. Or they'll say, I quit, I'm never coming back, but then they're back. So I'm not going to be doing this show as often, but I don't really see myself escaping a lot of the vortex. I'll still be checking on it, but I mean, even on the forums, I don't really post anything. I mostly only comment if it's show related. So I didn't post at all before I started the show. So I'm not going to be posting after, but if the show's officially over, am I still going to be checking the DB Cooper forum in the drop zone? Probably. I wish I could say no, but probably.
Let me ask you this. Is there anything else? I know you're starting another podcast, but is there anything else that you feel passionately enough that you would do another thing like this? The MLK shooter or the Zodiac, what else interests you besides DB Cooper?
It definitely would not be true crime. I'm not really a true crime fan. I don't listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. There are some unsolved cases or like historical cases. There are like heists interest me. Isabella Stewart Gardner Art Museum heist. I find that extraordinarily fascinating. As someone who is sort of like an AV nerd and works in the telecommunications industry, I find the Max Headroom incident also very interesting. Would I do a podcast about the Max Headroom TV broadcast interruption? Probably not. And then also it's like, that's another rabbit hole I don't want to go down. And
I'm from Chicago, so I know that one really well.
Yes, that's an absolutely interesting case. Yeah. And I have a very basic understanding of some of the broadcast equipment that it would take to pull that off if it wasn't an insider in one of those studios. So I find that really interesting, because if it was outside and not an inside job, then the sheer power that would have been required to do that is very interesting. And the idea that somebody could pull that off and disappear is very fascinating. I mean, the FCC actively looks for broadcast interference. So yeah, it's tough to get away with that. I mean, also, how many times have you seen that since then? Never.
Ever. Yeah.
So that's kind of a long, goofy answer to your question. It wouldn't be true crime if I had to do it about a specific topic. See, I have this good or bad personality where once I become interested in something, it's not just enough to read a book about it and watch a documentary. Like, I have to become the president of that thing. You know, like before DB Cooper, I would tell you it was Jeeps. And it wasn't just like that I could, enjoy driving and owning Jeeps. No, I had to design and build my own suspension systems. I became the treasurer of an off-road club. And then I was the president of that club and ran these giant events. And I don't know, there's just something about me where once I get interested in something, it's not enough to be interested in that. I have to be like deeply involved in the community.
Very respectable. Very respectable.
Or crazy.
Or crazy. All right, man. Well, I really think this was one of the coolest things that I've ever gotten to do, especially in the DB Cooper world. Your podcast, it's obviously a labor of love, dude, because it doesn't sound like you're making $1 million off of the podcast like Joe Rogan and Howard Stern.
Making $1 million off the podcast. I pay $15 a month for the show to be hosted. And I received a private donation for $100. And that's all the income. All the travel I've done, all the
split that with Russell.
I've I've paid for everything out of my own pocket. This show does not make money. I want to be very clear about that, because when Dan Greider's documentary came out and I was like, I don't think it's McCoy, but I like the documentary. There were people that were angry at me, and I had this criticism thrown at me that I don't want the DB Cooper case to be solved because it's in my best interest to keep the case open so I can keep my, quote, cash cow show going. That is so wildly inaccurate. I don't make any money off the show. I do this show because this is the show that I wanted to listen to. So it didn't exist. So I went out and made it. And here it is. I hope you like it. But I'm not doing this to get rich. I have a day job. I have a family to support. So the idea that I could make a living or even any money off of DB Cooper is ridiculous. There isn't anyone in the DB Cooper world that got rich from DB Cooper. There are rich people in the DB Cooper world, but they got rich from something else.
Right. Do you want to speak on that? Who are we calling out in that statement?
For being rich?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a handful of dudes that have their own airplanes. That's a level of money that doesn't seem attainable for most people.
Another question. I've never known this, and I know I tried to wrap this up a little bit ago, but what happened to the airplane? Did they continue using it for years, the DB Cooper airplane? Where is it now? Wouldn't somebody want that?
Yeah, they did continue using it. It's an airplane's an expensive thing. And so they did continue using it. They pulled the seat out that Cooper sat in. I think they still have that somewhere. But no, it went right back into service and was in service for a few years, and then eventually went to one of those airplane graveyard junkyards, probably Tucson or something like that.
Well, man, I really appreciate you letting me do this with you. Just to let you know, there are a few more questions, not many more, that I got on the website, but they were so specific to certain things that I figured that when you posted this podcast and there was a link on the Facebook page, then I would just upload those pictures or those messages to you, and that you could answer them there for people, because I didn't know the context in which they were asking the questions, but I know you will.
Well, if you have a minute, I'm down to hear them.
I'm trying to figure out in which context. Lisa, she wants to know, until Mark said the FOIA request on. So was there a FOIA request results on Ted B. Braden?
I'm not sure if there have been. I talked to Drew, I think it was just before CooperCon. And he had, some new or interesting stuff to tell me, but I don't I don't know the answer to that FOIA question.
All right. Mark M. Does Darren believe Bill Mitchell would, despite his reservations, recognize Cooper if he were shown a photo taken around the time of the skyjack? What about Tina Mucklow?
The answer to that is no. Definitely no. Bill Mitchell, I heard him. I saw him with my eyeballs and heard him with my ears say he could not recognize who Cooper was at this point in time. One of the things he said I thought was really interesting was right after the skyjacking, the FBI came to his house with like a stack of various yearbooks from military and like private parachuting organizations, and was just like, all right, look at all of these guys and see if you could see who it was. And then they'd come back with 4 different pictures of suspects, and they'd show him those. Does it look like the guy? And no. And then as the years went on, it still happened. So there would be a new agent shows up with 2 pictures, and no, it's neither of these guys. And I think I saw that other guy's picture before, but it's not him. But now it's at the point, it's been 50 years and he's been shown so many pictures of these different people. And, try and imagine a handful of your classmates in 7th grade. You could probably accurately describe your 2 best friends. But then if you were asked to describe the other kids in the class, it's probably wildly inaccurate. Bill Mitchell did not know he needed to pay attention to who this guy was until he was off the plane. If I ask you about the guy sitting 2.5 rows behind you on the other side, and you didn't know that you had to pay attention to him, what would your memory be of that guy? And then 50 years after that, there is no way that you are going to put a picture in front of them and they're going to be able to confidently say, yes, this was the guy. Way too much time has passed for that to happen.
All right. I'm not going to give anyone's last names on here, so that makes everything better. Or Hayden would like to know, does Tina Mucklow have full immunity to tell her story?
Well, she sold her rights. So there were probably a handful of lawyers involved in that. So seems like she does. She sold her rights to some movie company that's working on a movie tentatively called Nod, If You Understand. And Bill Radacek, I'm never sure how to say his last name. He also sold his rights to the same company. So I'm stoked to see that movie. I hope it's awesome. I'll see it the first second I can.
Chris wants to know, I want to know how Darren's going to react when we confirm that Braden was Cooper.
I will call Drew Beeson and congratulate him and ask him if he'll come on the show again to brag about how he was right and everyone else was wrong. That, if the case gets solved, that's what I'm going to do. The idea that I don't want the case solved because I want the show to go on forever, that's a stupid idea, and you're dead wrong. If the case is solved tomorrow and to my satisfaction, I can say, okay, yeah, I believe that narrative, then I'll do a few episodes about that. And then the show is definitely done. I don't want this to remain unsolved forever. I would like to know what happened. I've said before, if it gets solved and we get to find out who it was, but we don't get the story, yeah, that's a real bummer. And that's a huge bummer. That's not the way that I want it solved. I don't want to find out, in 2041, they have some magical time traveling DNA program that they can use to find criminals. They use that. They find Cooper. It was Tony Clifton all along. Can you believe it? But he died in 1996. Yeah. Well, now I don't get to hear the story of what happened when his boots hit the ground, what he did. Was this planned? So if it gets solved that way, that's a real bummer, but I'd still do an episode. And one of the reasons it's a real bummer if it gets solved that way is because it's still not quite solved. And so you would have probably the same people who are already on the forums now going back to try and figure out and retrace Tony Clifton's steps and figure out how he pulled this all off. So I'd prefer we get some sort of a magical solution where I get to know all of the details. I'd love to find, somebody recorded their grandfather tell this story before he got sick, and they're waiting for him to die so that they can release this tape of his confession with all this detail in it. People will say a confession is not enough at this point in time because there have been 900 confessions.
Right.
But if there was a confession that had a lot of really interesting detail that could explain a lot of this stuff, I'm willing to go along with that if you're able to provide enough detail to convince me. Joe Weber, rest in peace. One of the things I think she was trying to do with Dwayne is create a story that fit all of those narratives, which is why people didn't really think much of Joe Weber's theories, was because it was like ever evolving and changing, and she was trying to account for all this new information. So people just sort of dismissed it. I certainly did. I didn't think Dwayne Weber was a very good suspect at all. And today I think he's a legitimate suspect. And there are several people whose opinion on this case I really respect that think there is something interesting to Dwayne also. And Dwayne Weber, there's something about the sound of his first name and last name that's just tough to say for me. Dwayne Weber.
Dwayne Weber. All right. Well, to speak on that, because Nikki, our boy here, he found this question very interesting. Kelly asked, I know Darren has talked a lot with Tim Collins on Dwayne Weber. While I personally don't believe Dwayne had anything to do with Cooper, I know Tim Collins does. I was wondering, after his interview with Tim, has this changed his thinking on Weber for better or worse?
Oh, 100%. One of the things that first started to change my opinion of Dwayne was, that nostalgic journey. I forgot the name Tim calls it. The memory journey, the romantic journey, something like that. But they go on this trip across Portland and Seattle, and she does have a lot of sort of interesting detail in it. Who knows how much of it is true? But the only suspect where there is a story for the money ending up on Tina Barr is Dwayne Weber. No one else has a story. And then when I did that first interview with Tim Collins, it was very long, but like he was so well prepared, and he had these video clips and audio clips, and it told a very thorough and very interesting story. And that podcast was like 5 hours long. I mean, it was
a long one.
It was a very long one. And then Tim and I seemed to get along great. I did that interview at my house, and Tim drove up to my house in a snowstorm to do that. And it went great. And then after that, I didn't hear from Tim again. I sent him a message like, hey, the show's out. Take a listen. Let me know what you think. No response. After he left my house, there was no contact at all. And then he reached out to me months later. Hey, I want to do another episode. Would you be willing to do that? And I said, yes. But I thought to myself, we did 5 hours on Dwayne Weber. What more do you have to say?
What else do you have to say? Yeah.
And he came back and we did like 3.5 hours. And he's very convincing. He's very passionate about Dwayne. And he's also, willing to sort of look at the things about Dwayne that discredit him. And one of the things that gives Tim credibility, in my opinion, is that he isn't Joe Weber's memory man. He is someone who was investigating this on his own, who went down the Dwayne Weber path. But everything Joe says or does, he takes it with a grain of salt, and he knows what kind of a character she is. But I also like that he sort of developed this relationship with her in doing this. So I think Tim's great. And I do think it is a bummer when people just dismiss him as Joe's memory man, because that's not what he is. That was a moniker that HBO gave him that he learned of when he watched the documentary.
Right. Yeah, good documentary.
It was great. It was basically a shorter version of my show.
Yeah.
With video.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they had those same people on. Okay. I guess we're just going to keep rolling with this. All right. I've got some other things. All right. Earlier, you kind of spoke on, I'll listen to one of your podcasts. It could be the first time that I heard Eric's podcast, Sheridan Peterson. After I listened to Eric's podcast, I was like, oh, there's no way it wasn't Sheridan Peterson. And then before that, and when you're a rookie in the DB Cooper game, you heard the McCoy thing, and then the FBI agent saying, we got our guy. So you look at that case, and as a rookie, you're like, that makes perfect sense. Then you listen to your next episodes, when you listen to Nikki talk about Klansnick and then Robert Bradshaw. I think Robert Bradshaw was the first one. I was like, there's no way it wasn't that guy. It's such an interesting show. You've done such a good job with that, man. If I can just ask this question, Sheridan Peterson, that's one of the guys that I've liked. What dismisses him in that?
Well, Eric doesn't even believe it was Sheridan Peterson anymore. You can't really even place Sheridan Peterson in the United States in 1971. And also he was a non-smoker, different eye color.
Okay, I've always heard that too. And my thing was, isn't that, and it sounds weird and it's far-fetched, but aren't those two things that you could change? Is that not part of a master disguise? You smoke cigarettes, you put in contacts.
This is the question I'll ask to you on that. If you've never smoked cigarettes, I dare you to smoke 8 cigarettes in 5 hours.
Yeah, I don't think it. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
And there's some reports. It's one of those things that's always debated because it's like one person might have saw this, but there's a report that he had tobacco stained fingers. McCoy also didn't smoke or drink. It's easy. If you're a non-drinker, yeah, you can have a drink. If you're a non-drinker and it's your first time drinking, you probably shouldn't have your first drinks before a skyjacking.
Yeah, 2 cocktails before jumping out of an airplane, man. That's pretty rad.
But if you're a non-smoker in 1971 and everyone else around you is smoking, do you smoke?
I do smoke.
Can you tell when a non-smoker is pretending to smoke a cigarette?
You know what? I could if I was paying attention, right? I'd have to be watching him. You can tell if someone's inhaling or not inhaling. The smoke comes out different. It comes out in a different, I'm talking about pot here, not cigarettes. But if someone who's Bill Clinton style, not inhaling, the smoke comes out very like it would be ambering off of a cigarette. If you inhale it, it comes out much lighter. It doesn't look like the smoke that comes off of the cigarette.
Yeah, faking smoking is tough. You could fake smoke a cigarette. Okay, fine. I'll believe that. Fake smoke 8 in 5 hours and no one notices, or you don't smoke and you're actually going to smoke 8 cigarettes in 5 hours. You're probably going to be violently ill.
Definitely. Definitely. All right. So the next question is, now I feel like we're kind of all over the place. These are the questions that people ask you, though, so I'm going to give them to you. Andrew Jones would like to know if you have ever heard anything about how the McCoys celebrated their Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
the way you started the podcast, you dismissed McCoy, but there's some people on this forum that are like, let's hear the McCoy thing. Oh, let me just say one more thing. To speak on McCoy, if he's not DB Cooper, he's not DB Cooper, but also a super fascinating guy. Okay, just, pulled off this heist, got away with it, apparently was an idiot and told somebody at work about it, and that's how he got busted, but then broke out of a prison, got into a gunfight with, do they keep you in prison your entire life if you get away with that? He had kids, he had a wife, he escapes, he gets shot. It's just as fascinating of a story.
Yes.
A little less fascinating, yeah.
Okay, McCoy is not Cooper. Does that mean his life is boring? No. What we know about him is absolutely insane. He breaks out of jail. I think it was in Denver or something like that. Gets caught, goes to prison, breaks out of prison using a gun he made with dental paste or something. Yeah. Steals a garbage truck, rams the garbage truck through a series of gates to get out of the prison. Somehow escapes in the garbage truck. No one catches him. Gets his way to North Carolina and robs a bank, and then ends up getting shot by the police. But my favorite McCoy story is that once he gets home from the skyjacking, the National Guard calls him because they need a helicopter pilot to go look for him. And so the idea that he's in the air looking for himself, I cannot imagine the smile he had on his face flying the helicopter in circles for no reason.
Right. And I get that. So, sometimes I hear it's not McCoy. I understand that it's not McCoy, but this man, dude, is just as fascinating.
Here's one thing I think is possible with McCoy that I seem to be the only one talking about. There are a handful of suspects where there's a potential that they could have had contact with McCoy. And so if you could show me evidence that Ted Braden was having beers with McCoy in Vietnam, that would be the most interesting thing ever. Because here you have a suspect for DB Cooper and then a DB Cooper copycat who improved on a few things that Cooper didn't do. McCoy had more specific instructions. McCoy knew exactly where he was going to land. McCoy threw the parachutes out the back of the plane and brought his own on the plane.
Just awesome.
Yeah, some of the other things he did were very, very similar to Cooper. His execution is wildly different. He was sloppy. He left things behind. He drew tons and tons of attention to himself. Cooper didn't do any of that. So and the age difference, the physical description difference, the fact that there's no evidence to support McCoy being Cooper. There are people who, neighbors of his, who say he was home on Thanksgiving. There are receipts, gas station receipts, to and from Vegas. The FBI ruled him out. And if the FBI thought that it was DB Cooper, then why'd they go through with the John Doe indictment years later? Right. There's no evidence for McCoy being Cooper. None. You can't say a confession is, because I can give you 11 other confessions that are just as valid. So that confession doesn't work. But what I think should be pursued is, can you link McCoy to Ted Braden? Can you link McCoy to Wolfgang Gossett? Because I think those are the two people where there is a potential that McCoy could have run into them. Wolfgang Gossett was Mormon for a period of time, lived in Utah, was in the military and a survivalist. McCoy lived in Utah, was going to school to be a police officer at BYU, Mormon, also military. I mean, obviously that's a stretch there, but that's a lot of circles that they're both running in. Ted Braden with special forces in Vietnam. McCoy was a Green Beret, and McCoy was a decorated helicopter pilot. I'm not saying, oh, everyone that went to Vietnam knew all the other soldiers that were there. Of course not. But it's possible. And so I think more likely than McCoy was Cooper, McCoy knew Cooper and Cooper helped him with the second one. Maybe it's possible McCoy was the accomplice in the first one. I don't really see how Richard could have got to Portland, but maybe he did. But that's the story I think is more interesting. Did McCoy know Cooper? There's this book called Happy Valley that's it's called like Happy Valley Murder, Mayhem, and Mormons. And it was written by a private detective, and his wife was like a forensic accountant or something like that. And they theorized it was this parachute drop zone policeman they believe was Cooper. He was one of these guys who went around joking about the fact that he was Cooper. But in that book, they also theorized that maybe he knew McCoy because McCoy would have gone to his drop zone. So that's what I think. If you are like, it's McCoy, I don't think it is. But I think there is a good chance that McCoy knew who Cooper was.
Yeah.
And that is really interesting.
That's super interesting. To speak on something that I hear a lot, and you can agree or disagree with it if you want to. Sometimes when I hear people say the age thing, like Cooper was in his mid-40s and he looked like that, but everybody knows the handful of people. I have a buddy, Joe. He's 31 years old. He looks 46. Okay. He went bald at 27. He's a police officer, so he's got that cop haircut. He's got that job, and he just looks. You look at this guy, and you'd be like, "Yeah, you're 44," and then he turns around and tells you, "No, I'm 30." So there's some times where, like, I think that's where my mind goes with it. Like, was it Robert Bradshaw and McCoy who were way younger than what people perceived to them to be, or they were just way younger than.
Both of them did look a little bit older, especially McCoy. McCoy definitely looks older than a 28-year-old man in his mugshot.
Yeah.
He definitely looks older than that. But, Tina Mucklow sat next to this person for at least 3.5 hours. And she sat right next to him. She's 22, 23 years old. She would have some idea.
I don't believe it was McCoy.
Yeah,
because she sat next to this man for 3 hours. A year later, when he is caught, there isn't any, in my opinion, there's no way that you wouldn't be like, yep, that was the guy. If you brought him into the room, she would know,
Yeah, 6 months. That's not a very long time. She got pictures and she got audio clips of McCoy. She confidently said it wasn't him. And that's not the only thing the FBI did to rule him out. They couldn't place him in Portland. They believed he was at home on Thanksgiving, which was confirmed by neighbors of his that weren't in the family. They checked the mileage on his car and didn't believe he could have gone to Portland and back. So there's just, but the age thing, I'm willing to give a few years, go back a ways. Like, they reported mid to late 40s. I think the youngest report was like 35 and the oldest was 55.
55, yeah. And he was apparently in Vietnam. Like, you've seen these war photos, you've seen a bunch of horrible things, you're like, you just age drastically, like I've just never been one to say, oh, I'll rule this person out because they said he was 29, but really they said he was in his mid 40s. That's just one thing that I've always like, that's not concrete proof.
No. And I'm going to stick with the age. I don't believe that the age could be that far off. Yeah. If you have a fantastic suspect who is 33 years old in 1971, I'm listening, but
28, I get it.
Yeah. In my opinion, Cooper's in his mid 40s.
Yes. Now, everyone, I'm not saying we're discrediting people who have been on the podcast before. There's no way, in my opinion, your opinion, I'm asking, that he died in this jump. I don't believe that you would have found something, right? Shoes, clothes. I mean, think about all the things that he had. He had to have. He took the bomb case with him, which it. I don't know when you guys say Ashante case. What are we talking about?
A briefcase.
Okay, Ashante. Okay,
attaché.
Attaché. I didn't know if it was a thing that was like strapped onto the side. But how do you take all of that with you, and it not just fly everywhere? I like the theory of when someone says they saw road flares being dropped out of an airplane in the middle of the night. And I hope to God that's what he did. He opened up that case and dropped road flares and someone helped find him. But there's just no way that he died. And it's crazy to think that.
I want him to have survived. The story's a lot better if he survived. But there is equal evidence he survived and equal evidence that he died, because there is no evidence either way. Right. We know he jumped out of the plane because he wasn't there when the plane landed, but we don't know where he landed, if he landed. The one sort of interesting thing is, let's say he augured into the ground somewhere, which I think Himmelsbach is the one who started the augured into the ground. Where the drop zone was, there was a volcanic eruption in 1980 or 1981. Mount St. Helens blew. And that would have changed a lot of the landscape in the area that he landed in. So there is like some credibility that the evidence of Cooper's body or his belongings or whatever completely disappeared when the landscape changed, when Mount St. Helens blew. I don't really buy that. I think something would have been found. If he pulls his parachute and gets stuck in a tree, he's found right away. And I've talked to smoke jumpers, and if your parachute gets stuck in the tree, guess what? You don't climb up and bring it down. You cut yourself down and the parachute is stuck up there.
Right.
So if he pulls his chute, lands in a tree, at the very least, the parachute is found right away, if not DB Cooper. If he's a no pull, statistically, it's like 99.9% he'll hit ground and not water.
Okay, that's a great question. As someone that doesn't know the case all that well, how much water, how much of a possibility was that he landed in a river? Around here, we have rivers, but like we have the river that separates the Mississippi River that separates Illinois and Iowa. It's a bridge that connects the two. So you land in a river. You're not talking about a mile swim. You're talking about 300-400 yards. So in what situation and where could he have fallen where he would have been in water and drowned and whisked away in? Do you get what I'm asking?
Oh yeah. I think the odds that he lands in water would be the same as if you took a full court basketball shot and nailed it.
Okay.
You would have to try to land in water. Lake Merwin, is it big? Yeah, you could go water skiing on it. It's awesome, but it's not that big. And if you landed in the middle, yeah, you could probably swim across. They also searched it with a submarine. So he's not in the bottom of Lake Merwin. If he pulls his chute, likely as soon as he's in the water, he's going to get out of his harness. If he has training for this, right. Get out of his harness, right. And will sort of have to leave the chute wherever it is, because he's not going to be able to swim with it. I talked to Navy SEALs about this, landing in water. And the only, if he pulls over the Columbia and lands in the Columbia River, probably let's go a few miles east of the Glenn Jackson Bridge by the airport. The river is probably 3/4 of a mile wide. Where it crosses that 205 is a little wider, but there's like an island in there. It's possible he lands in the water, but if he pulls his chute and lands in the water, he's likely found pretty quickly. You have that big floating object with the parachute and all his gear and everything like that.
Right. He's not stinking. He's getting caught in something. There's, and then sometimes, and this is just conspiracy theory talk. Like everyone says the weather and his shoes, but I mean, couldn't he have easily been, you said it wasn't that bad. You've got a set of thermals on underneath your suit. Is there some contraption you can keep? I've always questioned the shoes. People sit there and say, oh, his thumbs were stained with tobacco smoke and he was wearing dress shoes and everything like that. So it's like, you've got real specific details about what this guy was wearing, but his face descriptions, people have discredited the entire time. The one person says, oh, that doesn't look like him. The next one, like the picture that we have of him is obviously not perfect, but the minute details that people sit there and are hung up on, everything was thought out.
Yeah, shoes specifically, I think, is interesting because people always repeat he was wearing loafers. And
right.
Loafers, you sort of think like low top slip-on dress shoe. That's what comes into my mind when I hear loafers. Can you jump with loafers on? Yes, you just have to like arch your foot to keep them on your feet. Is it ideal? No, but fly.
Yeah, hell, you could Velcro, like the bottom of your sock to something. Like if you thought this plan out the way he thought it out, you'd have to know he was experienced. He would have to have known these shoes are going to fly off me when I jump out of this airplane.
Yeah, I talked to this one parachutist because I like to ask them, what would you put in the bag? The people talk about he had a green or brown paper bag or a canvas sack with him also. And I like to get people who jump to speculate on what would be in there.
A gun.
What would you need to be in there? And I always said gloves and goggles. Like that's what you would put in there. And right. This gentleman was like, bro, you could put gloves and goggles in your coat pocket. You don't need to carry that in a separate sack. And he was like, one of the things that I would bring in that sack is a roll of duct tape. I would duct tape my shoes on, and I would duct tape the cuff on my shirt and my pants so that my jacket and my pants didn't start flying around. And I hadn't thought of that before. Like, that's interesting. Brilliant. Like, you can jump in a suit. You can find pictures of that, footage of it. The guy in The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, Treat Williams' stunt double, I assume, jumps out in the daytime in a suit. Seems to be no problem. But the idea that he's like, oh, I would tape up my arms and my legs on my jacket and my pants and tape my shoes on. I found that interesting.
I find that the most brilliant thing that I've heard about the DB Cooper case in a while. That is awesome. Yeah. I speculate, and what kills me to think about sometimes, and I've heard you guys talk about it before, but the potential of a plan B, like what was it? Either not do it at all, or like you said, you show that bomb in that bag, there is a gun. Does it go down an entirely different way if he has to sit down in the middle of the plane, or he gets any negative reactions from the flight attendants?
I've thought about that a lot. I don't know, because we know he had a knife on him because he starts cutting up one of the other chutes. Is it a small pocket knife, or is it like a giant buck knife? In my mind, I'm picturing a small pocket knife that he's using to do this. Not exactly an ideal weapon if you're going to go up against people with guns. So is the bomb real? I don't think it is. But what is his plan B? If he isn't able to jump from that airplane, he's basically being transported in an aluminum tube to somewhere else where there are police waiting.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think The opportunity for it to go wrong for him was when the plane is on the ground in Seattle. I believe the pilots could have escaped, like there was some emergency release on the front window, and then they could get out there, and there was like a rope ladder. I hope I'm not screwing that up if you are a huge 727 fan and I got that wrong, but I believe that could have happened, but the flight crew didn't want to leave Tina alone on the plane with him, because you had three dudes up front. It's just Tina in back with Cooper. And so they chose not to do that. But I think if they would have escaped and the bomb was real, so now like worst case scenario for Tina, she's alone with this guy who has a real bomb. Based on his other behaviors, I would say he would tell Tina to get off the plane and then he would blow it up. Because you have to look at, he asked for meals for the flight crew. If you're thinking about murdering some people, do you really care if they're hungry? That's just not a concern of yours at all. But he cared that the flight crew would now have to be working later than they were scheduled, and so they would be hungry. Tina says immediately after the hijacking, the first press conference, I'm paraphrasing her, but he was never unkind and always polite. And that one time on the ground in Seattle, he was annoyed that it was taking long, but he was never mean or cruel. That's a pretty complimentary description of the man who was holding you hostage with a bomb.
Yeah.
So I think if the bomb's real and he has to go to plan B, based on what I know about a guy who I don't know who he is, I would say that he would probably get her off the plane and then blow the plane. Maybe he had a gun. I don't know. But still, do you want to get into a fight where you have to walk down the stairs of an aircraft and then get into a gunfight with 24 FBI agents? Who are eager to brag about the fact they shot DB Cooper, obviously.
Right. Which brings me to my next question. Dude, well, we're just letting him fly now, which is awesome. Why let that airplane take off? Do you get what I'm saying? Why were they willing to let him leave Seattle, but we're going to had a big stakeout plan for him in Las Vegas? That's never made any sense to me. Like if the plane landed in Las Vegas and he was going to refuel, and this all happened in Washington or in Seattle. So now why wouldn't you just, you got him there, the people are off the plane, you did the same exact thing in Las Vegas. Has there ever been anything spoken about that?
Yes, there is definitely an answer for that. So there are two reasons why that plane takes off from Seattle. The first reason is that I've looked this up before, but I don't remember the number, so I'll just make one up. But Northwest Orient Airlines paid, $107 million for that plane just a few years earlier. So the idea of losing a $107 million plane plus the revenue they would have gotten from future flights and work with that plane versus the $200,000 that Cooper was asking for. If I'm running that airline, that's a no-brainer. Okay, don't mess up the plane. Don't kill anyone. We'll give you your money. And that was Northwest Orient Airlines' attitude from the second this happened. The other reason I believe the plane was allowed to take off was because the FBI had botched a couple of hijackings recently where in one, they just lit the plane up on the ground and civilians were killed. Another one, the plane gets started, but they shot the guy. So then it crashes off the end of the runway. They didn't have a good track record. And in the late 60s, early 70s, I'm not trying to make light of this, but the police were quick to shoot back then. So it was a different mentality. And having received all of that bad press from these botched hijacking interventions the FBI had, they sort of stood back a little bit on this one and allowed Northwest Orient to deal with the hijacker.
So I guess then the last question of that would be, if they didn't think he jumped and there was still proof of him on the plane when they got to Las Vegas,
Reno,
would they have been so eager to board the plane, search it, and do whatever? Or do you think they would have let him go from there?
That's a good question. When they land, I think it's Bill who is the first one back to check to see if he's there, and he's not. And then the FBI boards, if I believe I have that correct. So I'm not sure if they were like, hey, he's not on the plane anymore. He jumped. So they couldn't communicate with him right before it landed. But if he's in the plane when it lands, what do they do? That's a good question. I'm not sure if they would have, you know what? I think they would have let him take off from Reno again. I really do.
Take off.
Yeah, because there was an attitude like, let's just comply with these hijackers. The planes are too valuable. Let's just do whatever they want. And so there was this attitude of, if there's going to be a hijacking, you do what they want. Because if something goes wrong in the air, it goes really wrong.
Right. Man, that's awesome. Okay. Man, I never thought ever, I know you do this all of the time, never in my life have I had a 2.5, 3-hour conversation about DB Cooper. Okay. So
there's not many people that could talk
awesome.
about it for that long.
That could do this. All right. The last question that I have on the Facebook site is, and I'm going to butcher this guy's name, whoever that guy is that sold all the airplane security.
Najib Halaby.
How do you say it?
Najib Halaby.
Najib Halaby. Okay. People are asking what you know about this guy, if he's still alive, and if you would ever have him on the podcast.
He's dead. He has a memoir. Where's my Najib Halaby book? Crosswinds is the name of his memoir. That's a book, another one of these books where I should have bought 70 copies of it when they were $11. When I was the only person on the world looking for the Najib Halaby memoir. But unfortunately, I just talk about it on this show, and all these rare books are now too expensive for people to buy. Somebody messaged me like, dude, do you know Crosswinds is like $90 now? And I was like, I paid $11 for it 2 years ago. I should have bought a stack of them. All these books are like that. What do I know about Najib Halaby? He was this executive who is caught up in all these hijackings going on. The episode I did with Brendan Kerner is great. His book, The Skies Belong to Us, The Golden Age of Hijacking. Pretty sure I got that title right. It's really good and covers this all really well, because once these hijackings started, the airlines were saying, we need security. We need security. This is terrible. We need help. It's all the responsibility of the airport. It's all on the airport. It's not on us. And the airport was saying, it's not our responsibility. It's got to be the government's responsibility or the airlines. But we're just basically a port. We're not responsible for the security of passengers on planes that don't belong to us. And so you had this debate over who was going to be responsible for security at the airport. Is it going to be the airlines? Is it going to be the airport? Or is it going to be the government? And Najib Halaby was sort of like, saw an opportunity to go around and push this. He worked, I want to say it was like for American Airlines for a while, and a very successful career. He also coincidentally met up with Nixon the morning of the hijacking to discuss the issue of airline security. If you want to get even crazier, go to the Najib Halaby Wikipedia page, and goddamn, the picture on the Wikipedia page is a dead ringer for DB Cooper, dead ringer for the sketch. But he couldn't have gone from being in Washington, D.C. at noon to get on a plane in Portland at 2:50. It's not possible. And I think there was like a document that showed he had another meeting later that day as well. Do I think he had some sort of involvement in this, or there was some cover up that they pushed DB Cooper to help get the security passed through? I don't think so, because there were a bunch of hijackings after that weren't like government cover-up jobs. They didn't need a fake hijacking because there were hijackings going on. Most of them wanted to go to Cuba. You had the first hijacking for money. I get my copycats mixed up, but was the first one Paul Sini or Glenn Tripp, whichever one of those? They attempted the first skyjacking, doesn't go well. Dudes end up one. This guy I think was hit with the axe. Yeah, this was the axe guy, axe to the back of the head, which is a bummer. And so
I never heard that. Yeah,
Cooper is the second skyjacker who asks for money, but his is wildly successful and a lot different than the insane drug-addled person who did the first one. My favorite skyjacking, though, is I get the skyjackers' names mixed up, but I think it's Glenn Tripp. Maybe. I don't know. One of them. He the stewardess slips a couple Valium in his drink.
I've heard of this, yeah.
Skyjacking. And his demands go from he wants like $500,000 and a private helicopter to he asked for a rental car, 3 cheeseburgers, and a 5-minute head start. And then it's like when he's walking down the stairs to get to the car, like he's heavily intoxicated and the police just grab him.
Just grab him, yeah.
So the stewardess on that, like, shout out to you if you're alive listening to the show. You're a true badass, and what a move to be. Could you imagine like you're holding up a bank or a train or something, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit! Like, I think,
hey man,
I think I got drugged. That's very embarrassing.
Oh, that's awesome. I wanted all this money, but now I just like a cheeseburger, please. Yeah. And a head start. That's awesome. I think that's it. I'm on the Facebook. I got nothing left. I'm sure down later and being like, oh man, I had these 3 other questions that I had. But if you, what's it called? For weeks, I've been writing down, that's 6 pages of notes and questions and the Facebook things. And I wanted to take this as seriously as I could, because like I said, to tell you the truth, man, I was listening to the podcast and I was like, man, I had these questions for him. And then I sent you that text message after like 3 Jamesons. And I was like, that guy will never respond to that. Okay. And I've sent you text messages before. I was like, hey, it's been 3 months. Where the fuck are the podcast at? You know? And you're like, hey, don't worry, man. Some more are coming. So I've always followed you. I can't wait to hear your new podcast, obviously. When you commented earlier about the, what was his name? The Chicago guy that took over the radio?
Max Headroom.
Max Headroom. Now, for some reason, like I know that story. Oh, Max Headroom, some guy that took over a TV station for 5 minutes. That's all I know about that. But now, even your 3-minute description of like, it's fucking impossible to do that. No one's ever done it since. Now I just want to kind of go look at it and research that, because I'm that same type of guy too, man. When there's something that I like and I find interesting, I try to figure out all the information about it. So I think that this has been really rad for me, really cool. I respect everything that you do. I think it's awesome. I think people should know that you recorded those episodes and you didn't put them out yet. You were nervous about them, and that guy was like, oh, this guy did nothing, and then your back was against the wall and you did something about it. Like, hopefully people see, and that's what I wanted to do this for. Like, this guy's making this awesome podcast for all of us to listen to. everyone listens to it, you know, and what is this guy doing? You know, like, it's really, really cool.
If there's something about this format, about long form interviews that are audio only, where, you know, you could be in the kitchen cutting up onions, or you could be driving a truck, or you could be on a treadmill or working on furniture in your garage, and you're part of a conversation. You don't get to talk in the conversation. You're just listening to the two other people. But as someone who is a very passionate fan of the spoken word, there are people where I'm like, in my head, they are a huge celebrity, because I've spent, you know, in some cases, hundreds of hours just listening to them talk, even though I never got to speak back to them.
That's how I feel about you, brother. Okay. Very, very, very cool, man. I was like, I know all this stuff for your next podcast. I heard that I was super nervous about this. And I mean, I had a blast and learned a lot. Just very cool. Thank you for allowing me to do this with you. It was very, very cool.
Thank you for setting it up. I've had a few people, I told you, you know, say that they wanted this to happen, but you were the first person that was like, I want this to happen and I want to be the one to do it. And so I respect that. As someone who has cold called and emailed people out of the blue, I get it.
Yeah. The podcast means a lot to a lot of people. So it's very, my wife has had to listen to this nonstop at nighttime, because I get home from work at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then a new episode will be on, and I turn it on. And then after that, it starts going through the next podcast on the Apple playlist, you know? So she's like, Jesus Christ, Kyle, I woke up, I listened to this guy, Darren, talk about DB Cooper for 6 hours and I couldn't sleep. And it's, you know, very, very cool, man.
Well, thanks, Kyle. I appreciate this. Is there anywhere people could find you if they want to tell you you did a good job, or you were terrible, or you asked all the wrong questions?
I'm on that DB Cooper site, like crazy.
The DB Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook.
Yeah, the DB Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook. And other than that, I don't know what I want people contacting me and talking about.
Well, that's a great idea. Let's just keep it to, if you want to find Kyle, you could head over to the DB Cooper.
Head over to the DB Cooper
Facebook
podcast. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it.
Man, I really appreciate you, Darren.
If you want to chat with Kyle and tell him he did a great job, or complain that he butchered your question, you can find him on the DB Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook. Do you have a theory for the Tina Bar money? Did you find a parachute and some old 20s in the wall at your grandpa's house? Hit us up. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or you can email us, dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Kyle Kesterson for volunteering to interview me. Thank you to Russell Colbert for voluntarily getting that awesome Cooper Vortex tattoo. Thank you to Darren Schaefer for volunteering his song for us. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.
Here's a story we all know about a man many years ago. Hijacked a plane, so we were told. Then he jumped into the cold. Lights are burning and a cigarette. He's in the air, the stage is set. Polite and kind, the people say it's time to make his getaway. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Rolled up in his coat-built tie. He's got enough to change his life. Where he landed, no one knows. But from his tale, a legend grows. Was a cold, dark, rainy night. As he walked, he saw light. Held his cash close to his side. He just needs to catch a ride. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Soaking wet down to the bone. Look for a place to use the phone. Little cafe outside of town. He walked in, he just sat down. Met a man with a cowboy hat who told a friend right where he's at. Into the night he disappeared, and from that night a legend reared. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. 40 years, the secret's out. The story has been told. D.B. Cooper's done running now. He was 80